Good evening, everyone. I'm Sue Hodgen, and we are calling this December 2023 regular meeting of South Porch Planning Board to order at 6:01. We ask that everyone silence or turn off their cell phones. We will start, as usual, by removing any hats, and those who can or will, please stand while Board Member Scott Jones offers our invocation, and we'll follow with our Pledge of Allegiance to flag and country.
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this opportunity to come together tonight. Be with us as we go about the business of the city. Help us to make wise decisions for the city. Be with us throughout the holiday season. Be with all that are traveling. Help us get everywhere safely. Be with us as we travel home tonight. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
We're noting for the record that our ETJ member, Donnie Joyner, is present by phone. Well, we're working on that then tonight, but since we're unsure of transmissions and can't see Donnie for votes, we'll have ETJ alternate Chris Jones stepping in as a full voting member tonight as his appointment allows. Next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes. Members were issued these minutes of the November 16th meeting in advance of this meeting. Are there any changes or corrections? Do I hear a motion to approve them as prepared? So moved. Thank you so much, gentlemen. We do have a motion on the floor. Any final discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Item E is approval of tonight's agenda. Members were issued this evening's agenda in advance of the meeting. Are there any additions or corrections to it?
Should we do an update on where the review committee is with the sign ordinance?
Mo, do you have anything prepared for that? I mean, we can kind of wing it when we get there. We'll add that on, absolutely. Thank you. Mo, is that most appropriately done in old business or just down in other business for an update? Okey-doke, thank you. Thank you, Fred. Any other additions or corrections? If not, do I hear a motion to approve these? So moved. Second, thank you. Motion on the floor. Any final discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Item F is public comment. Do I hear a motion to move into public comment? So moved. Second? Motion is on the floor. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Madam Deputy Clerk, is there anyone that signed up to speak this evening?
No, ma'am.
Anyone submitted anything in writing to read?
No, ma'am.
Thank you very much. This is the way to move on with an agenda. Merry Christmas to us, huh? Okay. All right, thank you so much. Then, do I hear a motion that we end public comment? So moved. And a second? Second. Got quite the repetition going on here in these first two seats, too. Motion is on the floor. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That also passes unanimously. Thank you. Old business is item G. Item 1, conditional zoning text amendment. I'll remind the members that this body worked through multiple education sessions beginning in January, public meetings, and that we and the Board of Aldermen heard public comment at numerous meetings of both bodies. City Planner, Ms. Meehan, would you report, please, on the staff updates from the changes requested by the Board of Aldermen in August? This begins, gentlemen, on page 7 in your packet, with page 8 containing the changes that the Development Services staff has drafted.
Good evening, Chair and members of the Planning Board. Tonight, I'm going to do a short overview of, oh, it's off, excuse me. Brief overview of what conditional zoning is, and then I will move into the changes that were requested by the Board of Aldermen. So as you all know, yes, we have been through a series of different meetings, but I just wanted to give a small update to say that just kind of get everybody back up to speed a little bit. So conditional zoning is a process. It's the zoning designation of a property that can be changed with specific uses or standards that are openly disclosed, allowing for consideration for the impacts from the planning staff, the elected officials, and the public at large. These projects have a high degree of certainty that they will be built and constructed if approved, and it's a regulation tool with site-specific terms that only apply to parcels that are part of that request. Some benefits to the city: there is a strict development approval process that requires pre-application meeting, public input meetings, and then the legislative approvals through the Planning Board and the Board of Aldermen. To the public, it's an effective and impactful method for the public to participate in the zoning review and proposal. And to the applicant, it affords us flexibility to execute a project that is unique and doesn't fit in traditional zoning district opportunities and districts. Some examples of conditions that are used that are helpful to both the city and to the public are increased landscaping and buffering, additional setbacks can be required, a maximum density limit, access conditions to the property, site design, limit on allowable uses, so you can say which ones are or not, whereas in a regular zoning district, you have to consider all uses that are allowed within that district. And also you can consider some infrastructure. So today, conditional zoning is allowed in Southport in the business districts, and those districts, it must be tied if you would like to come in with a proposal for a conditional zoning in one of these districts. It has to be tied directly to the existing district, meaning you must be able to meet some of the dimensional standards, as well as you can only have the uses that are allowed within those zoning districts for the conditional zoning. You cannot have a specific conditional zoning for your property with different uses allowed. So some opportunities that arise by allowing conditional zoning. Again, we said that the current allowances are very restrictive. You have to consider all uses. You cannot put any conditions. You cannot consider anything but what is allowed and what standards are within the UDO for that zoning district. There's little incentive to the applicant to do anything inventive or changing it up so that they can work more. They just do the minimums a lot of times. And the existing zoning encourages sprawl and one-story strip development throughout the city. And the standards of our conventional zoning are uniformly applied to all parcels throughout the city. So the business district in one part of the town must meet the same standards and include the same uses as the business district in another part of town. So those are some things to consider. As the chairman had mentioned, this was a process that started in January of this year when it was first introduced to the Planning Board. And between February and July, we had multiple planning board meetings. We had two special meetings. We had a planning board hearing, public hearing that was noticed. There was a Board of Aldermen town meeting. Then there was the public hearing, and the Board of Aldermen chose to send this text amendment back to the planning board in August of 2023. So the Board of Aldermen requested that staff bring back some language, and their requests included ensuring that the city was following the UNC School of Government's process for conditional zoning, that there was a requirement of a pre-application with staff, and that the applicant held a public input meeting must be conducted prior to the application rather than prior to the submittal to the planning board of the public hearing. So I would just going to go through each one. So the assurance that the city was following the process for conditional zoning, yes, we absolutely did. The document was referenced to ensure the compliance with the general statutes 160D. The next one, the Board of Aldermen were requiring a pre-application with staff. So staff put together some language that is found in other parts of the UDO for the pre-application meetings. So the addition is that pre-application applicants must request a pre-application meeting with the UDO administrator prior to submission of an application to discuss the procedural and substantive matters related to the proposed application. Previously, it was they could request a pre-application meeting. Then the Board of Aldermen asked that the applicant public hearing meeting be conducted prior to the submission of application. So the language in 211C1 was changed to read that after the pre-application meeting and prior to the submission of a rezoning application, the applicant must conduct one public input meeting and file a report of the results to the UDO administrator. Further, they asked that documentation was incorporated in the proposal that was submitted, so that we added number 2, that the report will include a summary of the public input meeting and how the public input was incorporated into the proposal. So with that, I will open the floor for any questions that you have. Staff submits this and asks for consideration of approval as requested by the Alderman, the changes to be sent back to the Board of Aldermen.
What questions do members have for these changes that have been drafted? Anyone?
This is a question not about the changes, but on your table you showed a little while ago, conditional zoning was applicable to highway commercial? Okay.
Yes, it's applicable in any of the commercial or non-residential zoning districts currently, correct?
Mo, I want to be sure, can we request more than one public input meeting? This implies one, okay, as it's written. Can we request, can we have more than one? If so, do we need to put that in writing in this amendment?
I think that if you want the option to request a second one, you would want to add some language that says if necessary, or if certain standards weren't met, or there were still questions from the public, a second meeting may be requested.
Well, I don't know about everybody else, but I think we should CYA on that and put that in there, even if it's not used. It's what'll catch us if we don't have the ability to do that I'm concerned about. We want to be sure that we have sufficient public input, sufficient public involvement in everything, so we want the most we can get. And I'm assuming that citizens would too, because they've pursued input in a lot of past submissions. So I think that may be something that we might want to make those changes for that. I say too, even at last week's meeting for the Board of Aldermen, a great example for CZ was shown for the manufactured housing request. If that process was in place and used there, the city would have required, I imagine, conceptual drawings and more specifics on that proposal that was submitted, and that request that was submitted, and the public would have weighed in before we had opportunity to talk about that, or the Board of Aldermen did. Without CZ, though, the applicant making that request didn't have to provide much information about that. So I do think we need to include in there the ability to have more than one meeting and public input meeting. Is everybody in agreement to get that inserted in there? No issue with that?
And just adding on to that, especially in the pre-application, that if the applicant sees that there's something that they could do better, that second meeting could really help clarify that before it ever gets to us, so we don't have to reverse and go back the whole process again. Yeah, get it out there the earlier the better, because there might be something that they don't understand about the community, that when the community raises their questions, that they might say, well, you know what, we're going to take this and go back and we'll have another meeting before we even put our application in. That'll give them an opportunity to do so.
Agreed, Will, that's a good point. Thank you. So it looks like, pardon?
Is there any guidance from the state on optional meetings, additional meetings that have been set up?
There is not anything in the statute that says anything about it. It says that there must be a public input, but there's nothing about an additional meeting. So I was going to check with council to make sure that this was legally binding.
So I'd suggest that we table this for this meeting and let staff work on that addition to the amendment, to the revised amendment, and bring it back to us at the next meeting. And let's be sure, that's a great idea, Mo, to be sure with council that that's okay to do, and maybe get some, I'm sure there are maybe other towns that have done this already, so that we're not reinventing that wheel.
Absolutely.
For your time.
Yes.
That'd be great. Thank you, ma'am.
I have one question, if that's all right. So conditional zoning is tied back to whatever it's currently zoned in the uses, so we can't change the use. What if someone owns something that's a commercial use currently, but they want to rezone it to a residential, but also go through the conditional process? Do they have to rezone? It's more of a process question, I guess. Do they have to rezone it to something residential and then apply? Or can the rezoning be part of the conditional?
Yes, so the conditional zone currently is tied to the zoning, so you have to do the commercial or conditional rezoning with the underlying commercial zoning district that exists. With this amendment, you could make a customized district that can include any uses that you would like or the applicant would like. It just has to make sure that it is consistent with the land use plan.
And I want to note too that on page 13, item E on here, the effect of approval is, for me anyway, the very crux of conditional zoning. As you read that, E1 states that everything agreed to by the city and the applicant becomes the ordinance by which that CZ district would be governed. And for me, folks, that means that if a CZ submission works its way through to approval, there's no way that a developer could go off the rails and do unchecked development in Southport. As has been alluded to over the last several months, the executed agreement, development services, staff, and other appropriate city staff would have the authority to oversee that not happening. So it lays a very clear path to not going off the rails in all of this. Is there any other questions or comments? Okay, then do I hear a motion to table this resubmitted text for UDO section 2.11, conditional rezoning, for additional staff drafts and return to us at our January 2024 meeting? It'll bring us a year to working on this then. Do I hear a motion? So moved. Thank you, Will. And a second? Second. Thank you, Fred. We do have a motion on the floor. Any final discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you so much. Good discussion. Appreciate that. The next item is number 2, text amendment for mixed uses in highway commercial zoning district. Ms. Meehan. This is page 52 in your packets, folks.
All right, so this is a text amendment that was brought forward by an applicant and was heard 3 months ago originally for a request to amend the table of uses and the standards to allow mixed-use developments within the highway commercial zoning district. So as you can see, the change is fairly simple text-wise. It's just adding highway or mixed use as a permitted standard in highway commercial, adding highway commercial to a floor area devoted to the dwelling units shall not exceed twice the floor area devoted to the permitted business. And then we removed no mixed use building shall exceed 40 feet of commercial plus 2 floors in height, so that it comes into compliance with the new height regulations, so that no mixed-use building shall exceed the maximum height limit established in 3.9 dimensional requirements, table 3.2. The applicant is here this evening, so if you would like, I would like to have him come up, speak, and answer any questions. I know that there were some questions that you had, and I'm also happy to answer any questions that you have. And for the record, the highway commercial areas are the bright red zoned areas on this map. So you'll see up here in front of River Mist and the the Southport crossings, and then just past the Walmart area, if you will. Okay, the spillover.
Mo, I have a question.
Yes.
So does Famous Pizza and the Bald Head Peninsula there, are they in the highway commercial? It looks like they are.
Yes. They're highway commercial. Is that actually?
All that red.
Right.
This is 87 right here.
Oh, yeah.
Coming down.
Right.
This is Gandy. And
Yes.
they're right there in the corner.
Right there. That's correct. Yes.
Thank you, Mo. Okay.
Purpose of what we're doing here is we're in Lot 9 on Rob Gandy Boulevard. But we're proposing to build like an office condo retail space. The text amendment will allow us to sell those separate, which will allow us the possibility of a little bit cheaper housing for people that wanted to buy a condo, and then we could also have the office space below. I believe at this time we're still able to build that type of property but not sell them separately. Is that correct? So this is basically would be the change that would allow us with this text amendment. I gave y'all a little handout on sort of what we're proposing, with a retail office type space below with condo above. This is pretty predominant in a lot of areas throughout the state. It's allowed growth in commercial areas to go into residential somewhat too. Plus, the bright spot of this is it doesn't impact residential areas that are densities where people are residential. It sort of relocates some of that density to different spots. But this has been done throughout the state. It's not something indifferent. We have actually had soil work done on the property that will allow us potentially to have I think it's 8 bedrooms and 4 offices for septic. So that's been already perked and soil test has been done. So we know we're able to do it with the soil work, and we have county water there. So that's what we're proposing. Now I know this is an impact, and I don't know if this meets conditional zoning to where we could just do that versus changing the whole zoning district. But I don't know the option there, but it seems like they had to change the whole district. Is that correct?
The limitation with the conditional zoning for this is that the mixed use is not a use that is now allowed, so they can't use that because it's tied to the zoning district that exists and the uses that are allowed, and that's the only uses that can be used or considered for or non-residential conditional zoning in the current UDO.
Are there any questions?
Does anyone have any questions for the applicant? Go ahead.
Right now, you're just looking at Rob Gandy okay. Because, I mean, Rob Gandy's pretty much wide open right now. But my concern is changing that for everything else, because there's so much going on out there and so much that could be impacted. I'm just wondering if we could break that down a little bit, you know, if they wanted to do, I mean, Rob Gandy's pretty much a clean slate out there for most of it. I mean, but as far as the other stuff, you know, you've got larger communities out there that, especially if you look at River Mist, they would face, with that type of development, they would face a huge impact there as well. And then you have places like Earl Cluis's that could face a huge impact. And then there's other things along 87, but I mean, Rob Gandy is pretty much wide open, and it could, you know, I think the infrastructure could be added to it to handle it, but I'm really concerned about how far this is gonna go as far as the other areas. That would be my concern on it.
Mo, as far as the red area, do we know how much acreage that is? What is the total land mass that could be affected by this change?
I apologize. I don't have a good.
As far as the lot size?
No, he would like to know how much highway
HC.
commercial is existing.
Exists at this time.
I obviously would be happy to get that for you, but I do not have it this evening.
Was that part of that presentation that Wes had from a few months ago?
Yes, that'll be part of
Okay.
that, yes.
I actually had a note about that. All of us need to understand that the ETJ, that development is going to spread out into the ETJ, and we should want to be careful about how it's going to look. And I think that build-out study that Wes presented to the alderman recently showed the number and the size of the parcels that could be developed. The city and we as a planning board should be looking towards guidelines over size and appearance of these areas. We want the city, we want the board, we want the citizens to be involved in how Southport looks, not just our quaint downtown, but as you enter town, the outskirts and the entry corridors. And I would interject this as well. This past General Assembly session, there was a flurry of activity. There were bills that were introduced. One that was introduced would have removed any oversight that municipalities have over ETJs. And another one had a hint of municipalities zoning changes for the accomplishment of the General Assembly's workforce housing goals, as they defined it. Folks, those of us who read these bills and understood the implications saw them for what they were, real threats for towns' oversight and planning efforts. We best not forget them. I predict we're going to see them again come 2025. So we best be working on our own plans and a way to show the General Assembly that Southport is supporting commerce and allowing for affordable and workforce housing. Highway commercial zoning has the potential to give us diversity of business and housing. As we've said before, we need workforce housing, plus we need to consider the city's requirements towards open space. Obviously, we need more housing. We've talked about that for a good while. This would provide some more affordable types of housing like apartment rentals, condos, or townhomes. And we've heard tonight that the intention is office and condos for this area. However, allowing dwellings in highway commercial zoning as a by right permitted use with the current mixed use standards doesn't create the kind of dialogue and community input that could result in projects beneficial to the city. We need to get some guidelines on the scale of these projects as they're coming at us, as we're looking at the ETJ. So for me, such a broad sweep amendment adding mixed use for all of highway commercial, is that the most appropriate thing for us to do? If you'll look at table 3.2, and I think Mo, I don't know if that's what you referred to a while ago, it's on page 3-56 in our UDO. It's the dimensional requirements by zoning district. You'll see the current setbacks in highway commercial. There's an 8-foot side setback for this area. Our mixed use language isn't designed for scaling for these type development projects. The UDO's current existing CZ conditional zoning process does provide for community input and the ability to have a dialogue between the city, the planning board, and a developer. We touched on this briefly in an earlier meeting, but I think it's reasonable and prudent for us to begin developing alternative text changes that could support the addition of mixed-use dwellings in the highway commercial zone, but invoking CZ as the way for these types of missions to proceed. We want to assure that we have needed public understanding and input into changes that are going to affect our entry corridor and all the commercial areas. So I'd like to open it up. Does anybody have any more questions for the applicant? I hate to have him stand up if there are no more questions for him. Thank you, Mr. Graver. Appreciate you coming. Will, go ahead.
Mo, actually, this one's for you. Sorry. But do you know, I asked about if there was any way to do just a quick survey on the infrastructure, if it could handle something like this. And also, too, Could staff possibly check with the county and see if there's any, because, I mean, the red areas on this are just ours. But I also want to know if anything's going in for the county as well, on the other side of the road that's not marked yet.
All of that infrastructure for highway commercial is serviced by the county. I did not reach out to the county. They have capacity that we know of, and what they're proposing or permitting outside of our ETJ, within what we would consider Southport, they're have to check to make sure the infrastructure is there for them too. But if you would like me, I'd be more than happy to reach out.
Yeah, I'm trying to look at it from a mirror image. If we've got something, if we don't have something on this side of the road, is it going to be on the other side of the road? And exactly what, how big could that be? Because if you put it on both sides of the road, well then, I know we've got a 4-lane coming, but sometimes it takes more than 4 lane.
How does parking work? Because, so parking, if we were mixed use, the parking is tied to the uses for the commercial space, right? So the parking's kind of a wild card. And then the residential up top, what's the required parking for it?
They still have to include parking for, the parking requirements for a dwelling unit must be included in the parking standard, or the calculations. So the business will have their requirements, and then the dwelling units will have their required. And I believe is it 2 spaces for mixed use? So they have to include that with the business.
Other questions or comments?
I have one. So what would it take, what process would it take to allow mixed use and highway commercial but subject to CZ? Because that would seem the way to go by case.
There would have to be a text amendment to the existing conditional zoning that would allow mixed use in, let's say, highway commercials. You would have to change the language in the UDO.
But with that way, it wouldn't be a blanket change that by right you can do it. It would be case by case with CZ zoning.
That's correct.
Going back to the reason why we're adding a U, or why not rezone to, I guess, office, industrial, light industrial, or one of the others? Would that give them the mixed use? Because I thought, maybe I'm wrong, but.
In 3.1, it's showing OI in it for mixed use, but not light industrial.
Oh, never mind. I guess why not just rezone it? Can you sell them as separate units that way? I guess I'm caught up with the whole, can we sell them as 2 different units bit that he talked about earlier.
So the reason that was brought up is in the other zoning districts or like highway commercial, you can have a commercial accessory dwelling unit. So you can build an accessory dwelling unit for the commercial space, but it has to be tied to that commercial space, and it must be used for employees or the owner of that business. So that's the only way right now that those types of dwelling units could be built in highway commercial. And so I think that's what they were trying to, it's already existing as highway commercial, so they were just asking to see if this would be something that would be to the board's liking.
Is there verbiage in the UDO that says that?
Yes, sir.
Exactly.
The accessory dwelling commercial, where permitted, the following shall apply. The residential unit may be occupied solely by the person engaged in the principal use or a full-time employee and their family members residing with them. The site shall provide an area of open space not occupied by any buildings, parking, or structures equal to the floor area of the residential unit. The amount of floor area for the residential unit shall not exceed 1,500 square feet. The residential unit shall be located totally above the ground floor or totally to the rear of the principal use, so as not to interrupt the commercial frontage. In addition to the required off-street parking for the principal use, 2 off-street parking spaces shall be provided for the residential unit. And that is for the accessory dwelling commercial, which is allowed as a special use in the planned unit development, O&I, Central Business District, Highway Commercial, Light Industrial, Highway Industrial.
And Mo, can you give that citation where, if you can give a page number for that?
Oh, yes, of course.
I'm
So
sorry.
that is going to be section 3.6, accessory uses, and that's going to be page, so that's 3.6B, and that's page 316 within the UDO.
Thank you. What other questions do we have?
I know that part of this, we said that you said this could be handled with a text amendment,
Oh, I'm sorry,
as far as the dwellings, and you said about conditional zoning for commercial?
so in order to allow a mixed use only in the highway commercial as part of the conditional zoning process, if you wanted to keep the commercial zoning that you exist in the UDO now, there would have to be a clause or a new standard written within that portion of the UDO to allow the conditional zoning process with the mixed use and highway commercial. Or if the conditional zoning as being proposed does get adopted, that would be a use that could be considered without having to do any other text amendments.
Okay, I'm wondering if we should look at some samples of that and view the language before we proceed any further. And then that way it gives us more information as to how we could deal with this if it comes to that.
So are you making a motion to set this aside or to table it until we can look at proposed language to make those changes?
Yeah, I think that would be the thing to do, is make a motion to hold off on this until we look at some sample. We can look at some different samples that we can discuss amongst each other in maybe our next meeting or whenever possible to get it to us, and then that way we can make a better informed decision on that, if that's something you could provide for us. And then that way, if there's
Want to repeat that motion?
I went off again. I fell in the pool again, didn't I? I'm looking to make sure that we get the best possible decision, so that any examples, if we have maybe one or two examples of the language of what it would be, that we can look at it, and if one suits the board but one doesn't, then it'll give us a better informed choice than we have right now.
So, let me see if
I think
you
I
want to
can-
phrase it? Go ahead. Go ahead.
I think, if I'm right, let me know, and I'll take credit then. But I think what you're trying to say is you want to know, can there be some draft amendments to make a change to the existing commercial conditional zoning that would include mixed use for what they want to do? That's it. Okay.
So are we giving Will or Kevin the credit for that motion?
Will?
Okay. We have a motion on the floor. Do I hear a second? Second. All right, any final discussion on that? Go ahead.
Just real quickly, this is really, this concept is really, really intriguing. And I can see it would be good in a lot of places. We need smaller housing, we need more affordable housing. More smaller and more affordable single-family houses on private lots is not the future. I'm really intrigued. At the same time, I'm ignorant on how this has been done other places, because this could be very exciting. It could, and it could be very much a benefit, but the appearance and all the other concerns y'all were talking about, I'm agreeing with, and so I'm not going to disagree with the motion, but I do believe this needs to be considered very, very seriously for the future of Southport.
I absolutely agree, Roy. That's when I mentioned that before. I think all municipalities are going to be under scrutiny for how they're handling their planning efforts. We've seen that from this past legislative session, and good luck, Mo, on making all of this work for our town, you know. But I do think it's something that bears, this is something that we need some proactivity in this to set our course and all of that. So we've got a motion on the floor to look at other alternative text changes that can support the addition of mixed-use dwellings in the highway commercial zone. We've got a motion and a second. Any final discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you so much. The motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Will. Thank you, Mo, for that. All right. We are down to item H, new business. We had no items shown there. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming. Merry Christmas.
Happy Yuletide.
There's always got to be one that's different, right? Okay. Item I, other business. The only matter under this item, as it was in November, is an update on the comprehensive plan revision. The majority on the Board of Aldermen agreed with Mr. Alt's opposition in November to naming the Planning Board the steering committee to work with the Stewart Company as this revision gets underway, and they instead voted yesterday into place his plan to widen the steering committee to various entities around the city. With this plan, most city boards or committees will be represented. If I'm understanding this right, and Mo, you correct me if I get the numbers wrong, there'll be one from beautification, one from forestry, one from historic preservation, one from Parks and Rec, two from the Planning Board, and one from the Board of Adjustment. Is that correct? Okay. Each committee or board is tasked with naming its members and reporting those back to staff. The city will accept applications, and an ad hoc committee of aldermen will conduct interviews for two additional members, an involved citizen and a business owner, making for 9 members total. Is that right? Thank you. Since Stewart will be ready to begin work in January, we need to name our 2 members tonight, one from the ETJ membership and one from the city membership.
I'd like to volunteer if we're taking volunteers, or I don't know how we do this.
For the ETJ,
yeah.
position. Thank you, Chris. Thank you. I appreciate that. We will need as well to have a city member.
Sue, I think, and looking at the board, I mean, I think the board's excellent in the short time I've been on it, but I've been awfully impressed by your research, thoroughness, and independent thought, yet your whole interest is the city. And I would nominate you for the second position.
So, I mean, I'll serve on it. I don't have a problem doing that. Do you want to, am I going to take that as a motion? Do you want to include both names?
Both names.
In that motion? So we've got a motion for Chris Jones as the ETJ rep and for myself for the city rep on it. Is there a second? Motion is on the floor. Any final discussion?
I just wanted to mention one thing before we go forward. I had talked to Roy about this, but he wasn't going to be able to do it. But if it was 15 years ago, he would wipe the floor with this thing. But thank you for your consideration, Roy. I really thank you so much for considering it. I know you've got other things, but and don't worry, this is going to come back to the planning board, and you'll be able to exercise your talents here. So thank you so much.
Any other discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thanks, folks. Now, I will say this, looking back over Stewart's submitted proposal, I'm going to give this quote out of their proposal. This plan update will be developed through integrating public engagement and best planning practices while also being refined by local priorities and perspectives. Their design is structured in 3 phases that include multiple staff meetings, stakeholder group meetings, steering committee meetings, community visioning workshops, including a walking tour, and the Board of Aldermen meetings. I say this to emphasize that all of us, whether or not on the steering committee, should be involved as citizens in these stakeholder meetings, giving your own vision, ideas, and concerns. And certainly you can connect with me and Chris now to give your ideas and concerns. The plan, as Will just mentioned, will come back to the planning board when complete for our discussion and acceptance or rejection. But I want it understood that because our membership on the committee, steering committee, was lessened, our involvement should not be. I want you all to stay involved as citizens, be heard. As I stated at last month's meeting, the board's steering committee members will work with Stewart's guidance to assure public participation and a productive end product. Now, all of our agenda items are complete. I'll ask if there's any additional items. We were going to bring up the sign committee. Mo, can you address briefly that? And Fred, can you help with that conversation too, to update where we stand with that?
Yes. So in, I believe it was the August meeting of the planning board, there was after a request of some changes to the sign ordinance for illumination, the planning board felt that they wanted to take a look at the ordinance as a whole to make sure that it was cohesive and meeting the goals of the city. So a sign committee was formed with planning board, Kevin and Sue and Fred, and they have been meeting. We've done some looking at the ordinance as a whole, just again to update the cohesiveness, looking at the size of the signs, looking at the colors, making sure that there is a good mix of signs, but also that there is also a theme that the city, when you're entering the city, there's some good cohesiveness. They want to also, they're looking at the coordination and consideration of the historic preservation standards to make sure that those are standards are also being met, as well as the cities as well. And I know I'm missing a few things as well. So if anyone else on the committee would like to also fill in any of those holes, I'd be happy to answer any other questions.
So a couple of the things that we were considering is one special for the historic district and the CBD, which would be a little more conservative there, and then in the rest of the business district, reducing the sign height. I believe right now it's 10 feet, and I think we're reducing it to 6 feet.
6 feet.
Right. And we're also looking at scaling back neon, possibly eliminating it, making sure any in-window lighting meets the city lighting ordinance in terms of temperature, that kind of thing. For example, I know it's popular for lighting around a window frame in a display window. If that's green, that doesn't meet the less than 3,000 Kelvin temperature requirement, so that would be an example. But the idea is trying to create more consistency. And even on, an example might be a doctor's building where there's 6 different things with 6 different doctors or 6 different businesses. They're all color theme the same way instead of a red one, a yellow one, and a purple one. So it's just consistency.
Anything from you for that committee?
On the committee, we, not myself, but others, I think Karen literally went around town and took photographs, I think, of every type of sign that existed in historic Southport and on the outskirts, which was beneficial. Then the research that was done was to go look at other communities that have historic preservation. We looked at Beaufort, we looked at, I think, Mount Airy, we looked at Warrenton, Virginia, which I'm partial to because that's where I'm from, and I knew what they had. And after a lot of reading and a lot of review, we sat down with Mo. We had probably a 2-hour meeting not that long ago where we tried to refine. But I think the intent is to get back more to the character of historic Southport as far as historic downtown Southport, get away from the, what I call neon lights, things that really don't add to the productivity of a business, but are just garish and take away from the atmosphere we want, as has been discussed by this board in the past. So I think we're making great inroads, and we really look forward to discussing it and putting it before the board.
And we are also opening up the possibility of considering murals being acceptable.
Mo, did that strike anything else in your brain to bring out? So we're still a work in progress, but as Kevin says, we're looking forward to making these advances and bringing it back to the full board. Thank you, folks, for that. Is there any other items of other business? If not, we'll advance to announcements. Anyone have any announcements? Donnie, I know you're there. Do you have any announcements?
No, my announcements will be in January.
Okay.
I have something for January, but December, the only thing I have is Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Thank you so much. All right. That is, and then we move to item K, your membership information, your chart, and your roster closes out your meeting packets for this evening. And now, with no other business, can I get a motion to adjourn, please? And do I have a second? Thank you so much, gentlemen. Motion's on the floor. Any final discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Better not be. Motion passes unanimously. With the evening's business concluded, I'll note that ETJ alternate Chris Jones will return now to non-voting status, and we thank you, Chris, for your help in this capacity tonight. Thank you, everyone, for attending. I wish all the members and our participating public all the best for a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Meeting stands adjourned, folks, at 7:01. Good night.